Here this morning. Nice and cool outside. Positive thinking, right? It is supposed to be a nice cool week. Not cool, but not as hot, right? That's a plus. Appreciate Dale bringing donuts this morning. If you would like some donuts and coffee, they're over there. I don't mind. Time of fasting is over. Mike Linton said he's gaining all 11 pounds back today. We begin a brand new series of lessons. We finished up the Gospel of Mark, and as I prayed and studied all week, 10 Commandments came to mind, and we don't study those very often, and so we're going to take not nearly as long as the Gospel of Mark, with 16 chapters. Sometimes we only cover 2 or 3 verses. 10 Commandments we can get in 11 weeks. 11 weeks. Huh? Well, today's the intro. And then there's 10, and we may group some of those together. I don't know. We'll see. But we're in Exodus chapter 19, if you want to be turning there. I've never been very good at setting the table. My mom taught me how to do it. I always did it wrong. On purpose. I figured if I didn't get it right, I wouldn't have to do it all the time. That was my philosophy. That continues through today. I don't set the table very often. When I do, I throw the plates on, slide the silverware to whatever side's closest. Everything's chaotic. And that's all by design. It's worked well, gentlemen. I do the same with laundry. Just pile it all in. Wash it on hot. You won't ever have to do it again. Well, I'm setting the table this morning for the 10 Commandments, so it may be a little chaotic. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I certainly don't want to be sloppy about it. I want to carefully lay some things out, put the utensils in the right place so we can dig into a fabulous meal over the next 10 weeks or so. And by the way, some of you will want to do some extra study on your own. Let me give you the resources that I have used. These are books that you can purchase. Not for me, Amazon has them. 10 Words to Live By, Jim Wilkin. The great work. The 10 Commandments by Kevin DeYoung. They're in the middle, the green one. And Words from the Fire by Albert Mohler. Recent polls show 80% of Americans claim to believe in the 10 Commandments. I saw that and I thought, man, that's high. 80%, that's 8 out of 10 people say they believe in the 10 Commandments. Only 14%, however, can name them. Now that says something, doesn't it? 8 out of 10 says, I believe in them. Less than 2 out of 10 can name them. Even fewer consider themselves as having kept them. For many Americans, the 10 Commandments aren't set in stone. It's more like the 10 suggestions or 10 outdated rules. Several years ago, Jay Leno was still hosting The Tonight Show. He did one of his segments called Jaywalking. You remember that? Where he just goes outside with a microphone and interviews people. And he went into the street and asked them to name just one of the 10 Commandments. Person after person. He went up with a microphone. They couldn't even name one. Of course, that's in New York City. One woman finally answered with her voice pretty low, God helps those who help themselves. Which I don't think is even in the Bible. Maybe in a roundabout way, but that's a suggestion. The 10 Commandments have influenced our country and laws of other nations more than any other document, however. They've been a positive good whenever nations have enforced them. and the people have followed them, but whenever nations and people have disregarded them, it has led to moral and societal decay. James Madison. Which president was he? Fourth. I knew we would have a history buff in here. The fourth president made this statement. We stake the future of this country on our ability to govern ourselves under the principles of the Ten Commandments. Well, we would not hear that today, would we? In their book, The Day America Told the Truth, how many James Patterson readers do we have? James Patterson, this book goes back a few years. James Patterson, he always teams up with somebody, and this time it's Peter Kim. They conducted the first and largest mass survey on private morality. They found a lot of things, which you'll see up on the screen, but the things that shocked me, 74% will steal something if they think you won't miss it. That's almost 8 out of 10 people. 64% will lie as long as nobody gets hurt. That's over 6 out of 10 people. I'm talking to our non-math majors now when I give you these statistics because that's the only math I can do. This book came out about 30 years ago. I don't imagine things have improved much, do you? Yes.
Back in probably the early 70s, I was teaching at West Frankfurt, and there was a store, wasn't it, behind the junior high. Some kids got caught shoplifting. They were getting lunch out. They were all talking about it, because they were all talking about it when they came back from lunch, and they were all upset because these kids were in trouble and there wasn't anything wrong. I'm thinking, what's wrong with this kid? So I did a survey of all my classes, and 70%, and that was in the early 70s, 70% of the kids thought it's only wrong if you get caught.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, we're in trouble.
Yes, and that's the mindset of the majority of Americans. We have moved as a country from what is right and what is wrong to if it feels good, go ahead. If you enjoy it, go ahead. If it's good for you, you go right ahead. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." Here at HCOC, you know what that stands for, right? Just making sure you're awake and with me. We don't want to be a light church. I don't mean L-I-G-H-T, I mean L-I-T-E. You know, everything's light these days. You can buy light dressing and salad dressing, and I know that because of the fast. You know, you can buy non-fat light. What does that mean? It means they're lying. It means less of something, right? We don't want to be light church. We want to burn bright, as in L-I-G-H-T, but we don't want to water it down and be less than. There is such a thing as right and wrong. And I believe it's found in the Ten Commandments. I think this is a timely study to remind ourselves. Exodus 19. Let's go there. Before we dive in, let's, I was going to have you watch a little video, and I just realized I forgot to put it in there, so we'll skip that. It was just a little intro to the Ten Commandments. But we're going to set the stage today. We're going to talk about 4 words. Redemption is number 1. Relationship, number 2. Reverence, number 3. Requirements, number 4. These all come from the children of Israel gathering at the foot of the mountain. Remember? That's the story we're going to look at, is the introduction. They gather at the foot of the mountain. God is about to give them the 10 Commandments. And these four items are crucial to that story with this summation statement. Redemption, relationship, and reverence come before God gives his requirements. That's sort of the theme for today. So number one, redemption. We are reminded that God saved his people, Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, 3 months after leaving Egypt. The Israelites entered the wilderness of Sinai. They followed the route from Rephidim, arrived at the wilderness of Sinai, and set up camp. Israel camped there facing the mountain. Now I want to bring out something because some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, that's a little backwards. I did not say they didn't obey him. There was still an issue of blood, right? There was still an issue of painting the blood on the doorpost, so on and so forth. And if you didn't do that, what happened? Firstborn. It cost you your firstborn. So I didn't say anything about not obeying. There was obedience, but he saved his people. He redeemed them. After serving as slaves in Egypt for 400 years, God raised up Moses to lead the Israelites out of captivity. And 7 different times, Moses spoke to Pharaoh with these words, "Let my people go, that they may serve me, that they may make a feast to me in the wilderness." That's in Exodus 5, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And God sent plagues. Then finally, when they were allowed to leave, God led them across the Red Sea at the Gulf of Suez. Recently, Egypt was in the news. Remember that? The last few months, a container ship blocked the Suez Canal for 6 days, just about a week. You remember what Egypt then did? They confiscated it, held the ship as ransom. $900 million. I imagine the owners were echoing, "Let my ship go." I don't know, that was just a thought that occurred to me. Hunger and thirst was their first companions. When they leave Egypt, they get hungry, they get thirsty, they grumble and whine and complain against God. He mercifully met their needs with living water and heavenly food and physical food. He was so good to them, but the people continued to gripe and complain. They craved a feast in the wilderness. They arrived at Marah. The water was bitter. They finally came to an oasis. Then they entered the wilderness of Sinai. It's an area that is uninhabited desert. We think of a wilderness as trees, woods. What is their wilderness? For those that were in geography class? Nothing. Desert. Vast nothingness. And they lived there for about a year. We read that they were camped facing the mountain. Horeb. Mount Horeb refers to a group of mountains 2 miles in length, 1 mile wide. On the northeast side, there's a plain that can hold 2 million people. That's where they're camped. Sinai is one specific spot. And if you look at it on a map, it's shaped like a pulpit. Now, previously, Moses has been here. He's been at this mountain to meet with God through a burning bush. Remember that? Exodus 3 and verse 12. God promises Moses he would return back to this same exact spot. I don't know if I put that up here. Yes, I did. "I'll be with you," God said, "and this will be the proof that I am the one who sent you. When you have brought my people out of Egypt, you will worship God right here at this very mountain." So here he is back there. He has his proof. As if the plagues weren't enough, right? And as if all the feedings, miraculous events that took place and all that wasn't enough, he now has confirmation. God enters into a formal covenant. Kind of a synonym is contract. He enters a formal relationship with his people. In Exodus 19, Moses goes up and down this mountain 3 different times to meet with God and bring messages to his people. Here's one of our works that I'm using as a resource, the 10 Words to Live By. Jim Wilkins says, God introduces the 10 Commandments to his people by identifying himself as the Lord their God and prompting them with, remember Egypt. Why? Because before Israel can pledge allegiance to Yahweh alone, she must recall her costly deliverance. Redemption. They were saved. Never forget that. Redemption. They were redeemed. They were paid for, purchased, led out of Egypt. Redemption, relationship, reverence comes before requirements. Number 2, word number 2. Relationship. God saved his people. And then verses 4 through 8. As Moses went up to meet God, God called down to him from the mountain, "Speak to the house of Jacob, tell the people of Israel, you have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. If you will listen obediently to what I say, and keep my covenant, out of all peoples you'll be my special treasure. The whole earth is mine to choose from, but you're special. A kingdom of priests, a holy nation. This is what I want you to tell the people of Israel." Moses came back and called the elders of Israel together and set before them all these words which God had commanded him. The people were unanimous in their response. Everything God says, we will do. Mark that, circle that in the Bible. Everything he says, that's what we will do. Moses took the people's answer back to God. Look at a few phrases. Number 1, God says, "I carry you on eagle's wings." Again, I didn't say they weren't obedient. They had to be obedient. But God saved them. He did the work. He may have asked them to do a few things, but he did the work. He swooped in like a swift eagle and carried his people out of bondage and brought them to himself. It's a tender picture of how an eagle pushes an eaglet out of the nest. But then the eagle flies beneath the eaglet so that they don't fall to danger while they're learning to fly. Listen to Moses' song in Deuteronomy 32, beginning with verse 11. He, that's God, he was like an eagle hovering over its nest, overshadowing its young, then spreading its wings, lifting them into the air, teaching them to fly. He put them on his back and carried them. Number 2, the second phrase. He says, "You will be my special treasure." But what's the key word in front of that? Not right in front of it, but in that sentence. Well, that's important, but there's one that's more important. Because it deals with the covenant. Listen, obedient. That's close. What's the first word in the sentence? Yeah. Circle that word. Circle that one. If is crucial because it's part of the contract. If you do this. Anybody take computer programming back in the 80s? If you did, you remember if-then statements? That was part of code. If this happens, then this happens. Way back there, I got an associate's degree in computer programming, 1985, 1986, basic COBOL, Fortran, Those are unheard of these days. It was outdated before I graduated. You'll be, if you will listen obediently. If you keep my covenant, then what happens? You'll be my treasure. You will be my special people. That's a phrase that refers to a king's private treasure box. His personal stash. Deuteronomy 4, verse 20. The Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance, as you are this day. They belong to him, and he considers them his personal private stash, his treasure, the most important thing to him. Third phrase. He says, the earth is mine to choose from, but you're special. You are, number one, a kingdom of priests. What was a priest? What is a priest? A mediator, a go-between. Someone that goes between man and God. But he says, you're a kingdom of them. Priests had special access. They served as mediators. God has always wanted his people to take the good news to the nations. We automatically think, okay, well, they had priests, and the priest was kind of the mediator. Not really. They could go to God themselves. But really what that's talking about is they were the mediators. Now, they didn't see it. They were supposed to touch the world all around them and bring the world to God. But they didn't. They took the mindset and the attitude, no, we're God's people. You stay out. Well, if you're real good, you can come in. If you're going to become just like us and go through all the rites and rituals and all that, then you can be part of us. They were supposed to be a conduit by which God blessed the whole world. But they weren't very good at it. They were a kingdom of priests. They were a holy nation. What does holy mean? Set apart. Sacred. Anything that was inside the temple was holy. Anything outside the temple was secular. Unholy. God's heart is for his people to be holy. Set apart for sacred purposes. Leviticus 20, verse 26. I am God, your God, who has distinguished you from the nations. So live like it. Distinguish between ritually clean and unclean animals and birds. Don't pollute yourselves with any animal, a bird, or crawling thing which I've marked out as unclean for you. Live holy lives before me, because I, God, am holy. I have distinguished you from the nations to be my very own. What was the first word? Well, that was in this. I mean, of the four words that we're looking at, the first word was redemption. Second word, relationship. Number three, third word, reverence. God reminded his people that he saved them, he redeemed them, and he wants a special relationship with them. If they will do all he says, they will be his special treasure. Next, he expects them to reverence him, revere him. We don't have time to go through all of verses 9 through 25, but let me give you some highlights. God tells them, as you come to the mountain, I want you to gather in front of the mountain, but I want you to wash your clothes. You wear clean clothes to church, don't you? Most of the time. He says, I want you to wash your clothes. I want you to abstain from sensuality or sexuality. I don't know why, but he said, I don't want you to have intimate relations with your spouse, and then I want you to gather before me at the mountain. And I don't want you to touch the mountain, that's mine. Keep your distance. Very careful preparation underscored the significance. Let's read a portion of it. There, beginning at verse 16. On the third day at daybreak, there were loud claps of thunder, flashes of lightning, a thick cloud covering the mountain, and an ear-piercing trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp shuddered in fear. Moses led the people out of the camp to meet God. They stood at attention at the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was all smoke because God had come down on it as fire. Smoke poured from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain shuddered and heaved. The trumpet blast grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered in thunder. God descended to the peak of Mount Sinai. God called Moses up to the peak, and Moses climbed up. He expected reverence. I know not a lot of people agree with me, but I hold the attitude he still expects reverence. And I think we are far too casual in our presence before God. Think about how all the senses were engaged. There was deafening thunder and a loud trumpet blast that grew louder and louder. That's the ears. They heard it. There was flashing lightning that lit up the darkness. They saw it with their eyes. The smell of smoke as from a furnace. They could smell it, their nose. They could feel the mountain trembling, the earthquake. They could feel it under their feet. That's touch. They could hear, see, smell, and virtually taste the fire as they felt the earth shake and quake under their feet. And all of that is designed for what? For what purpose? To get their physical attention and to show, I'm not something you mess with, God says. I am fierce. I want your attention, your full and complete attention. And verse 12 adds that God set limits. Keep your distance or what? You will die. You touch the mountain, you die. You come too close, you die. Twice we read if the people don't follow what God said, he would break out against them. Literally means he would burst forth. Tell me what you think they are feeling. What emotion do they feel at the moment? Fear. Petrified. The last time God manifested himself like this, do you remember? Genesis 19:28. Two towns. Sodom and Gomorrah. We take God too lightly. We treat him way too flippantly. We should be more like Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 6. Woe is me. Remember that great scene, that vision in Isaiah chapter 6, the first six or eight verses? I saw God high and lifted up, sitting on his throne. The weightiness, the gravity, the awe-inspiring glory of the Creator God, the great I Am. We woefully neglect his presence. I think of God vaporizing Nadab and Abihu. Why? They offered strange fire. I think of Uzzah, who was struck dead. Why? He was trying to keep the ark from falling. It's a serious matter to approach the Almighty. We should never be irreverent. Dare I say, even though many times it's humanity's fault, we should never be boring or bored. We never come to Him on our terms. Most of us are way too casual. I don't mean dress. I don't think that's not at all what I'm referring to. I just mean in our attitude. We take His commands, His commission, not serious enough. God is big and mighty and holy, and He is to be revered. And before you think, oh, wait, but all of that was in the Old Testament. Well, Hebrews 12. Verse 28, do you see what we've got? An unshakable kingdom. And do you see how thankful we must be? Not only thankful, but brimming with worship, deeply reverent before God. For God is not an indifferent bystander. He's actively cleaning house, torching all that needs to burn. And He won't quit until it's all cleansed. God Himself is fire. What was the first word?
Redemption.
Redemption. Second word?
Relationship.
Relationship. Third word?
Reverence.
Reverence. Redemption, relationship, and reverence come before He gives His requirements. But let's look at number 4, the fourth word, requirements. This comes from another of the books that I'm using as resource materials, Kevin DeYoung's Insight. The 10 Commandments are not instructions on how to get out of Egypt. They are rules for a free people to stay free. God said, I hear your cry. I will save you because I love you. And when you are saved, free, and forgiven, I'm going to give you a new way to live. Grace comes before the guardrails. Relationship was established before He gave them the requirements of how He expects them to live. Now, one of our purposes in this series is to learn the 10 Commandments. I put some bookmarks on your table. Grab one of those and stick it in your Bible. Grab several. I've got a bunch of them. Grab several of them. I tried to put, first of all, it had to fit. So I had to get creative with some of them. Let's read them together. Number 1, one God. Say them with me. One God. Number 2, no idols. Number 3, revere His name. Number 4, remember to rest. Number 5, honor the parents. Number 6, no murder. Number 7, no adultery. Number 8, no stealing. Number 9, no lying. Number 10, no coveting. You know, our children know the 10 Commandments. Because our teachers weave them into the Bible study fairly often, I'm sure. Have for years. Bible class activities, all that. Let's make sure we know them as well. So I'm going to ask you, you're not going to have to say them. I'm not going to call you up to the front of the class and say, give me the 10 Commandments. But why not learn them? Make that a personal challenge. And you can learn them the way that I have them there on that little bookmark if you want. I recognize that just quoting the commandments doesn't mean we're keeping them. Just because you know them doesn't mean you're keeping them. But you can't keep them till you know them. That's right. We have to know them to grow in our obedience to them. It reminds me of a cartoon I saw this week. Moses is holding up the 10 Commandments. His face is beaming. He says, hey, this is great. He says, from now on, nobody will have trouble distinguishing right from wrong. See the irony in that? Just because they're there doesn't mean we keep right from wrong.
Let me give you some observations. We just have a few minutes left.
In Hebrew, these are called the 10 words. It's just one word for each of them. We have stretched it out to a sentence or two, but they're just one word. The Greek translation, Exodus 34 and verse 28, it's called the Septuagint. It's called the Decalogue. Deca meaning 10, log. You know what logos is in Greek? Word. 10 words. So in Hebrew and Greek, they're just 10 words. These commands tell us who God is. We look at His law, we see His glory, we see His greatness. Deuteronomy 5 and verse 24 says, "The Lord our God has shown us His glory and His greatness." He wants us to know Him because of these laws that He gave us. These commands mark Israel as His chosen people. That was part of the giving of these 10 words. Psalm 147, 19 and 20. He declares His word to Jacob, His statutes and rules to Israel. He has not dealt like this with any other nation. They don't know His rules. These were for His people. But His people were to live them and bless other people because of them. These commands also become very good guardrails for us as well. He knows what's best for us. He set up the guardrails. Don't cross the boundary. These bring us good, not bad. Remember the first psalm. It's probably the second most well-known besides the 23rd. The tree is planted beside the waters. Remember? In verse 2 it says, His delight is in what? The law of the Lord. That's where our delight is. These commands were spoken by and written directly by God. Stated very clearly, Exodus 31 and verse 18, He gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. He spoke them, He wrote them, and they are very important because they come directly from Him.
And they were given twice.
The version in Deuteronomy chapter 5 is much longer. It was given 40 years later, and it was given to a different generation. This is the Exodus. It's shorter. It was given to the parents of those in Deuteronomy chapter 5. He didn't want them to forget. Various religious groups see them or list them differently. Did you know that? Catholics and Lutherans combine the first 2 commandments into one, and they divide the 10th into 2. The key isn't, though, how you list them. What is it? Whether you follow them, whether you keep them, whether you leave any out. Well, about 5 minutes left. Let's talk about interpretation, because that's really what you wanted to know, right? Are they for us today? It's a common question about the 10 Commandments. Are they binding for Christians today? Well, on the one hand, the New Testament seems to set aside the Old Testament law. There are times when you're reading the New Testament and it seems to say the old law is old, it's done away with, it's no longer valid, right? One example, Romans 6 and verse 14. You are not under law, you are under grace. Doesn't that sound like the Old Testament is done away with? On the other hand, there are verses that indicate the law will never go away, like Luke 16 and verse 17. It's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one dot of the law to become void. Never go away. Heaven and earth will pass away first. So how do we deal with it? Well, one reason the New Testament speaks about the law in several different ways is because there are different kinds of laws. There are civil laws, there are ceremonial laws, and there are moral laws. What is civil law? Well, in this case, in the Old Testament, many of them were man-made, I suppose, but God gave a bunch of them. But they were the laws that governed society as a nation. They were a nation under God. It included things, civil law included things like how do you go to war, what do you do in war, land use, the dividing up of the tribes, so on and so forth. Those are civil laws. So what is ceremonial law? Yeah, that's the worship, the festivals, the feasts, those kinds of things. Those were regulations given in Exodus chapter 23, and for worship at the tabernacle, Exodus 25 through 31. They were basically laws of worship. What you do when you come to worship me. Laws for clean and unclean foods, guidelines for priests, lots of instructions about how to offer sacrifices, so on and so forth. Then there was moral law. What is moral law? Right and wrong. How do you live as a citizen in the kingdom? The moral law is the righteous and eternal standard for our relationship with God and others. And his moral law does not fade away. He wants us to live to a certain standard and to live up to that regardless of the time that we live. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 17. There are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Things in the Old Testament were a shadow. Not the real thing. The real thing is Jesus Christ. But everything in the Old Testament is a shadow. That doesn't mean the shadow goes away. We look to Jesus Christ as our main giver of law. But we also don't get rid of the shadow. You learn from it. It's a school teacher, a master, a tutor. So are they relevant today? And if they are, how do we view them?
Well, let me give you some metaphors that might help.
Consider them a map. They guide our conduct. They tell us how to get from point A to point B. God's law teaches us how to live like God wants us to live. They're a map. How do I want to get to heaven? I look to God's laws. And I follow them as best that I can. I might get lost from time to time, but I always go back to the map. Secondly, they act as a muzzle. God's law keeps us from living lawlessly. Romans 13. The law is a deterrent. It keeps depravity in check. The threat of penalty is a huge preventative measure. That's why when a nation moves away from God's moral laws, trouble always follows. His law is a muzzle, keeps you from doing things he doesn't want you to do.
Another metaphor.
They're a mirror. His law shows us our sin. If you want to see if you've sinned or not, what should you do? Go ask somebody in town? No, what are they going to tell you? It's okay. You're not all that bad. But if you look where? In the mirror, in God's law, God's word, His law is the mirror. It will show you if you sinned or not. It's like rungs on a ladder as you climb your way and make your way to heaven. But it also means you're going to feel guilty sometimes. This culture doesn't like that. Well, time is up. We will jump into these 10 laws beginning next week with, well, I imagine the first one's a good place to start, but I really haven't decided that yet. But probably we're going to start with the first one. Thank you for coming to class. We're going to take about a 15-minute break and gather in the auditorium for worship in just a few minutes. If you can, when you go into the auditorium, this is just my opinion, I'm not